One of the biggest storylines coming out of the Detroit Lions OTA sessions is not necessarily about who is dominating the field right now, but about which areas of the roster deserve the closest attention as the team moves toward training camp. While there is plenty of optimism surrounding this football team, there are also legitimate concerns that cannot be ignored if the Lions want to make another serious run this season. The first major topic revolves around Ben Bartch. The good news is that there has finally been a positive update regarding his recovery. According to the latest information coming from head coach Dan Campbell, Bartch appears to be trending in the right direction and is expected to be ready when training camp begins. That is certainly encouraging news for a player who has been dealing with a lingering Lisfranc injury. Still, even with the positive outlook, the Lions are taking a cautious approach. There is no reason to rush a player back during OTA practices when the most important objective is having everyone healthy for week 1. Detroit has learned painful lessons about injuries over the past several seasons, and preserving player health remains one of the organization's highest priorities. Bartch may not be one of the team's biggest stars, but depth matters, especially on a roster with championship aspirations. Every healthy contributor becomes important once the regular season begins. Another area generating discussion is the offensive line, not because of a lack of talent, but because of the adjustments taking place within the unit. Offensive line play depends heavily on chemistry, communication, and trust. When players change positions or new faces enter the lineup, that chemistry doesn't instantly develop overnight. The Lions are currently going through a period where several players are learning to play alongside different teammates, and that naturally creates some uncertainty. It's not necessarily a reason for panic. In fact, this is a completely normal process for an NFL team that is evolving its roster. The challenge is simply that cohesion takes time. The encouraging part is the long-term outlook. Detroit has invested heavily in young talent along the offensive front. Players such as Cade Mays, Christian Mahogany, Blake Miller, Penei Sewell, and Tate Ratledge represent a foundation that could keep this offensive line strong for years to come. There may be some growing pains in the short term, but the organization appears committed to building sustainable success rather than delaying necessary changes. Another topic worth monitoring is linebacker depth. The Lions have players they trust, but there are questions about whether this group is as deep as it was a year ago. The departure of Alex Anzalone has changed the dynamic of the room, and now Detroit is looking toward players such as Jimmy Rolder, Malcolm Rodriguez, and Damone Clark to help fill important roles. Malcolm Rodriguez remains a player many fans are excited about, but the Lions are expected to utilize more nickel packages and fewer traditional 3 linebacker sets. That shift could help mask some depth concerns because the defense will often have defensive backs on the field instead of extra linebackers. Damone Clark is another interesting piece. The talent is there, but health remains something that must be monitored. If he can stay available, he could provide valuable support throughout the season. However, if injuries begin to hit this position group, the concerns could grow quickly. Losing a player like Rodriguez or another key contributor would immediately test the depth chart. While linebacker depth is something to watch, perhaps the most frustrating uncertainty involves Broderick Martin. Every Lions fan wants to see what he can become, but the reality is simple. Availability remains the biggest question. Dan Campbell recently mentioned that Martin has added muscle and improved his physical development, which is certainly a positive sign. However, until fans actually see him consistently on the field, concerns will remain. Injuries have prevented him from establishing momentum since arriving in Detroit, and every update about his progress is followed by the same question: can he finally stay healthy? That's the challenge facing Martin heading into training camp. The potential may still be there, but potential only matters if a player can consistently participate and contribute. The Lions are hopeful, the coaching staff is hopeful, and the fan base is hopeful. Yet everyone understands that this situation remains firmly in the wait and see category. And that brings us to what may be the single biggest concern surrounding the entire roster as training camp approaches. A concern that could have a major impact on the Lions' defense if things do not improve. The conversation centers around one of Detroit's most important defensive playmakers, a player whose situation continues to create uncertainty throughout the organization. As more information becomes available, fans will be watching closely because the outcome could significantly influence the Lions' defensive outlook for the upcoming season. What do you think about these concerns surrounding the Lions roster heading into training camp, and which situation worries you the most right now? The concern, of course, is Kirby Joseph's knee. Among all the topics being discussed around the Detroit Lions right right now, this is the one that has many fans paying the closest attention. The reason is simple. Unlike some injuries that heal with time and eventually disappear from the conversation, this situation appears to be something that may require ongoing management. The latest updates have not provided the level of reassurance that fans would have hoped for. In fact, the last comment surrounding the situation left more questions than answers. As things stand, the organization is waiting for training camp before making any major conclusions, but that doesn't stop the concern from growing. What makes this issue particularly important is who we're talking about. Kirby Joseph isn't just another player on the roster. He's one of the premier defensive playmakers on the team and an all-pro safety who has become a major part of Detroit's defensive identity. Losing that type of player for any significant amount of time would create a challenge that no defense wants to face. The concern isn't necessarily about whether Joseph can play football again. The concern is whether the knee can hold up consistently throughout the demands of a long NFL season. That's what everyone is waiting to find out once training camp begins. If he is able to participate fully and move without limitations, then much of the anxiety surrounding the situation could disappear. If the problems continue, however, Detroit may have to start considering additional options at safety. The Lions don't have enough information yet to make those decisions. That's why training camp is going to be so important. It will provide the first real indication of where Joseph stands physically and whether the defense can count on him to be the same impact player fans have become accustomed to watching. But while there are concerns on one side of the roster, there are also several position groups that should give Lions fans tremendous confidence heading into the season. One of the biggest strengths on this football team is the wide receiver room. The Lions have assembled a group that combines elite talent at the top with impressive depth throughout the roster. Amon-Ra St. Brown continues to be one of the most reliable receivers in football. Jameson Williams brings explosive playmaking ability that can change a game in a single snap. The addition of Greg Dortch is viewed as an underrated move that could pay dividends throughout the season, providing another versatile option within the offense. What makes this group especially encouraging is the depth behind the primary contributors. Players such as Jackson Meeks, Tom Kennedy, Cedric Wilson, and others provide competition and insurance if injuries occur. That depth becomes critical during a long NFL season where few teams make it through 17 games completely healthy. The same can be said about the tight end room, which may quietly be one of the strongest position groups on the entire roster. Sam Laporta remains one of the most important weapons in Detroit's offense and has already been participating in practices. Brock Wright is working his way back as well, giving the Lions another dependable contributor at the position. Then there is Tyler Conklin, whose arrival gives Detroit an experienced veteran capable of contributing both as a receiver and blocker. When you look at the complete picture, it's easy to understand why there is confidence in this unit. The Lions don't just have one talented tight end, they have multiple players capable of contributing in different situations. That's exactly the type of depth offensive coordinators love because it allows flexibility and personnel packages and play design. The running back room is another area generating optimism. With Jahmyr Gibbs continuing to develop into one of the most dynamic offensive weapons in football, Detroit appears ready to place an even larger share of the offensive workload on his shoulders. Gibbs has shown the ability to impact games as both a runner and receiver, and there is a growing belief that he can thrive as the featured back in this offense. Behind him, Isaiah Pacheco provides another talented option capable of handling important snaps when needed. That combination gives Detroit both explosiveness and depth in the backfield. Rather than relying on a strict rotation, the Lions now have the flexibility to maximize Gibbs' unique abilities while still maintaining quality depth behind him. The strength of the roster doesn't stop there. The offensive line may still be developing chemistry among its starters, but the depth behind those starters is arguably stronger than it has been in years. Players such as Larry Borum, Juice Scruggs, Ben Barch, and Miles Frazier have experience and have played meaningful snaps during their careers. That kind of depth becomes invaluable when injuries inevitably occur during a season. Finally, one of the most interesting developments from OTAs has been the quarterback room. Everyone already knows what Jared Goff brings to the offense. The Lions also know exactly what Teddy Bridgewater offers as an experienced veteran presence. But one of the biggest stories emerging from offseason practices has been the positive buzz surrounding Luke Altmyer. Competition is always healthy within an NFL roster, and the Lions appear to be building exactly that at the quarterback position. If Altmyer continues developing the way reports suggest, Detroit could find itself with the strongest quarterback depth it has had during the Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes era. When you step back and look at the entire picture, it's clear why expectations remain so high for this football team. There are legitimate concerns that need to be monitored, particularly regarding health and defensive depth. At the same time, there are multiple position groups that appear stronger than ever and could help carry this team through the challenges of a long season. If the key injury situations improve and the younger players continue progressing throughout training camp, the Lions may once again find themselves among the most dangerous teams in the NFL. A major reason for that confidence is that the Lions appear to have learned from some of the problems that affected them in previous seasons. One of the recurring themes throughout recent years has been injuries testing the depth of the roster. There were moments when key positions were forced to rely on inexperienced players, and the coaching staff had to make adjustments on the fly. This offseason, however, there seems to be a much stronger emphasis on ensuring that the roster can withstand those inevitable challenges. Looking across several position groups, Detroit has built layers of depth that simply were not available before. That's especially important because no matter how talented a starting lineup may be, the reality of the NFL is that depth often determines who is still competing at the highest level when December and January arrive. The wide receiver room is a perfect example of that philosophy. Amon-Ra St. Brown remains the centerpiece of the group, while Jameson Williams continues to offer game-changing speed and explosive potential. But what stands out most is how many capable options exist behind them. Instead of relying heavily on one or two players, the Lions have assembled a room that can absorb injuries while maintaining offensive production. The same philosophy applies to the tight end position. Sam Laporta remains one of the most important weapons on the offense, but Detroit is no longer in a situation where everything depends on one player staying healthy. Brock Wright and Tyler Conklin provide additional options that allow the offense to remain flexible regardless of circumstances. That versatility could become especially valuable under offensive coordinator Drew Petzing. Tight ends are expected to play an important role not only in the passing game but also in the running game. Having multiple players who can contribute in different ways gives the offense opportunities to disguise intentions and create favorable matchups. The running game itself could also look slightly different this season. There is increasing belief that Jahmyr Gibbs could see an even larger role than he has in the past. His development into one of the most dynamic offensive players on the roster gives Detroit the opportunity to build larger portions of the offense around his skill set.